Welcome to the latest episode of A.T. Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions, The Wave of the Future. The Wave of the Future will keep you in the know about the forces that are shaping the world of business, collaboration, globalization, and sustainability. We'll talk about how these forces are changing the marketplace and the innovative solutions that A.T. Kearney is bringing to our clients. We'll bring you real-life stories of how we are working with our clients and practical solutions to meeting the challenges of an increasingly virtual, decentralized, and resource-constrained world. Sharing knowledge is powerful. From Chicago, Illinois, I'm Stacy Rhodes, and I'm here today with my guest, Simon Rycraft from our San Francisco office. Today we will be talking about effective negotiation styles and communication techniques. Simon is a senior manager in our procurement and analytics division and has spent nearly a decade supporting international corporate clients across multiple industries in both the United States and Europe. Simon specializes in business process outsourcing, pre- and post-mergers and acquisitions integration, and divestiture strategy and procurement, as well as complex negotiations, including senior executive level coaching and classroom-based training. Hello, Simon. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Stacey. Good afternoon.
Simon, from my research, there seems to be several different schools of thought regarding most effective communication skills for use during negotiations, and more specifically, several differing opinions regarding the best style to use when negotiating. What exactly is a negotiating style, and can you give us some examples?
Sure, yes. I think in practice, there's really a long spectrum of styles, but at either end of that spectrum, there really is two extremes. At one end, there's a style called coercive, and at the other end, there is the cooperative style. I think most people are familiar with those two. The coercive style is also known as positional bargaining, or some other people call it competitive negotiating. That's really when people focus purely on their own needs and wants and really place little or no emphasis during negotiations on the other party, or even a long-term relationship. And they're using tactics like aggression or intimidation and coercive deception, and just considering those elements normal. On the flip side of the coin, the other extreme of that spectrum is the cooperative style. And that's really linked sometimes to low self-esteem, where people consider others as superior or more deserving. This kind of excessive consideration for others often leads to relentless concessions, where you create a lose-win situation with you as the loser. But based on people's personal comfort levels, their beliefs, their desires, most negotiations really display a mix of these two styles. But more effective and advanced negotiators are able to actually adapt their style specific to different situations. But it's also important to note that both these styles can be used effectively, but also ineffectively. The cooperative style, for example, can be very effective when negotiating with other parties who display cooperative characteristics, where those parties would be a lot less likely to react positively, to a coercive or aggressive demand.
So, if there's no one particular style that suits every situation, what guidelines should people follow to help improve their chances of achieving a desired result?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think guidelines wise, there's a few key principles can really make a difference, a big difference to someone being an effective negotiator, an effective communicator as well, and really help them get towards their most desired outcome or their target result for the negotiations. Maybe I think in my mind, we can probably split those into two categories. The first one is just the way that you approach the negotiations and your discussions. You should always be confident, you should be honest, professional, and friendly. People really want to do business with people they like, they trust, and they respect. And that doesn't mean that you should develop embedded relationships, and that doesn't mean that there are challenges when you are friendly in the business world. My kids go to their kids' school, those type of issues. But yeah, I still think honesty and being friendly are extremely important. And then next really is the fact that you should be using rationality, or you should be taking a rational approach in your investigation and your research, and also the way that you communicate. And that needs to reign supreme over emotions, really letting your emotions, your ego take control. Can take a successful negotiations and move it into a deadlock situation, without any reason, at the blink of an eye.
Simon, you mentioned that it is important to adapt your style based on different situations. In our previous podcast, we discussed the importance of understanding different cultures when we negotiate. What other factors should we take into consideration when planning our communication strategy and style?
Okay, so other than being cognizant of the different cultural influencing factors at play, as Claude Fidelan mentioned in the last podcast, the other element you really need to pay close attention to is the power balance that exists between the negotiating party, and that's putting the cultural influencing factors to the side. The style you use during negotiation really does give the opposite party a perceived reflection of what you and your company would be like to do business with going forward. So, depending on the power balance between you and the opposite party, the style you take really should, I mean, it really will impact the success of the immediate negotiation. And it can be extremely important to long-term success of the contract and then also the business relationship.
While style should be adapted to the people you are negotiating with, how about specific communication techniques and practices? What makes an expert negotiator stand out?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because there really are some key elements just in how people communicate during negotiations that really make a difference. So I'll go through a bit of a list. The expert negotiator tends to explore multiple options, probably nearly 2 or 3 times as much as an average negotiator, because they want to come up with a better deal. They want to increase the size of the pie rather than determine how much they can win from the discussions. And in order to do that, they also need to, and they also do, put emphasis on common ground, significantly more than an average negotiator. If you're working in purchasing, for example, you really have to sell the benefits of the contract to the supplier, and ensure you understand the reason that both of you are looking at going into a business together. Other more subtle ones is skilled negotiators really avoid irritators or offensive comments. It's just unnecessary. But unfortunately, the average or below average negotiator won't do that. You want to use fewer counter proposals as well. It's another technique that advanced negotiators tend to use. They really do explore the options that are on the table in front of them and look at expanding on them rather than just reacting negatively and saying let's move on, or coming back with other alternatives that don't take the other negotiating party's interests into consideration. And then I think one of the main ones is they ask lots of questions. Expert negotiator really is very, very effective at actively listening. And I think that's an important skill to have.
So I've heard about the importance of active listening before being a key attribute that allows a negotiator to enhance their detective-like skills. How can our listeners improve their active listening skills to help them achieve these types of benefits?
Yeah, so active listening isn't necessarily how it sounds. It's not just sitting on the other side of the table or on a phone and just being silent. Silent and listening are not, unfortunately, the same thing. So, what can you do to improve it? You have to concentrate on what the other person's saying, like really, truly concentrate, and then acknowledge what's been said. And I think taking both those elements into consideration, you really need to take responsibility for the completeness of the message. So if you don't know how to spell someone's name after they've listed it, ask them to confirm. If you're not 100% sure you understand exactly the point they're trying to get across, you ask them to confirm. You also need to make eye contact. Making and keeping eye contact on a video conference or face to face is extremely important and really, really sometimes underplayed. You need to pay attention to body language. If people are suddenly changing their position in reaction to what they're saying, is there a reason for that? And then avoid distractions by staying engaged. Put the phone on silent, close down the laptop, ensure that they really believe that you're interested in understanding what they have to say, whether it's a positive or a negative comment. That's extremely important.
We often hear that nonverbal communication is just as important as verbal communication. Would you give our listeners some insights into how they could interpret forms of nonverbal communication during negotiations?
Yeah, body language is extremely important. I think, from a historic perspective, nonverbal communication, something we've been discussing for hundreds of years. It really goes back, in my mind, to Charles Darwin's famous publication on the expression of the emotions in man and animals in the late 1800s. But since then, there's been a huge amount of research on these types, effects and expressions of the unspoken communication and behavior between individuals. However, the reality is, and the main issue that we have to handle as business professionals is that there is a significant amount of negotiating that actually goes on via email or over the phone. But from the first time you interact with someone, you're already negotiating with them, providing them with written or verbal signals, allowing them to profile you, your demands, and the parameters within which they need to operate. But to answer your question, I mean, there are several different things you can do to improve your negotiating position by better aligning or better appreciating body language during the face-to-face meetings, or over video conference calls. And I'll just give you three kind of more general examples. Someone is typically being responsive, engaged if they're leaning forward, they have an open body, open arms, or open hands. People are known to be reflective or perhaps evaluating their response or their next move when they're playing with their glasses or with their pen or stroking their chin or looking up to the right or sitting with their legs crossed or with one ankle on one knee. Another key one as well, people are typically lying, maybe lying as an extreme term, or maybe bending the truth if they're touching their face a lot. They're putting their hand over their mouth, they're pulling on their ear or shifting in their seat when talking. So these are important body language codes, but it's also useful to not read into them too heavily. They may just be sitting on an uncomfortable chair, or they may have some dust in their eye, which is causing them to wink at you. There are some principles that you can follow, and it's important to note, these do actually apply cross-culture. So you don't necessarily need to be looking at the body language and reading into it too much, but you do need to look out for sudden changes in position. Generally, those are reactions to something that's being discussed, either positive or negative. You need to check whether the body language they're displaying is actually in alignment with what's being said, or they're actually contradicting what is being said, which should push you to ask more questions. And then also, if it is face to face or over a video, if there's a team of them, check the position in relation to the other team members. It really does, ironically enough, often give you insights into the hierarchy within the team, and also helps you identify, based on that, authority.
In summary, Simon, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Okay, so I'll look at the broad topics that we've covered here. On style, it's really important to use an appropriate style to the situation. Review the power position, look again at the negotiation objectives and your negotiating strategy, and then adapt your style in accordance with that, but also based on your comfort level. Communication techniques of an expert negotiator, such as using a low number of counter proposals, trying to cancel out using any irritators to annoy the other person, and more importantly, active listening. And then on the body language, take note of the body language being used by the other negotiating team members, because that really will give you some insights into some kind of key nonverbal points that you're perhaps missing otherwise.
Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast on effective negotiating styles and communication techniques. I'm Stacy Rhodes in Chicago, Illinois, and I'd like to thank my guest Simon Rycraft for joining me today, and Tom Klein, our production engineer based in San Francisco. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Wave of the Future. If you have any comments regarding this podcast, please email us at podcast@atkearney.com. If you like what you hear, we hope you've told your friends. This has been an A.T. Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions podcast production. Join us again next time for The Wave of the Future. And remember, sharing knowledge is powerful.